Good afternoon. Welcome to day 3 of the International Faculty Development Program organized by Internal Quality Assurance Cell of Joginiwas College Autonomous on quality enhancement to facilitate academic excellence and well-being. It is my privilege to welcome our dear principal, Dr. Sister Mary Louisa Sebastian, our resource person for the day who have joined us virtually, Professor George Taratil, SDB, former President IACHE, All India Association for Christian Higher Education, and former Principal, Salesian College, Siliguri, and Dr. Melanie Garson, Associate Professor in Conflict Resolution and International Security, Department of Political Science, School of Public Policy, University College, London. I also welcome Sister Rosalie, our Administrator, Dr. Carol Stanley, IQAC Coordinator, and Dr. Latavi, Controller of Examination. My warm greetings to all the participants who have joined us online and to my dear colleagues. Now I request Mr. Nitin to take forward the session.
Before we begin, we'll have a brief overview of day 2. The topic of day 2 was technology-enabled teaching and learning. Ms. Sripriya KH, Technology Head, Innisfree House School, Bengaluru, conducted an insightful session on various Puzzle, Loom, Canva, Slack, ChatGPT, etc., to name a few. She also highlighted the importance of flipped classrooms to make learning interesting for students. The session concluded with discussions on the ethical aspects of artificial intelligence and how to tackle them. Moving on to day 3, we'll be dealing with the futuristic trends in education sector today. Our first resource person for the day is Dr. Melanie Garson, Associate Professor teaching in Conflict Resolution and International Security, Department of Political Science, School of Public Policy, University College, London. Dr. Melanie has been teaching International Conflict Resolution and International Security in the Department of Political Science at University College, London since 2011. She is also the Cyber Policy Lead in the Internet Policy Unit at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, working on cybersecurity policy, tech and internet geopolitics, tech diplomacy, and tech and foreign policy. Dr. Melanie is an accredited mediator and has worked as a solicitor in the International Disputes Department. She has also worked as Director of Development and New Programs for the Center for Jewish Arab Economic Development, Israel, Director of Communications for Peaceworks LLC, New York, as well as for the People-to-People Department of the Economic Cooperation Foundation, Israel, and the Education Programs Department for the United Nations Association of the USA, New York. Dr. Melanie received her PhD from University College London and holds a master's in Law and Diplomacy from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, specializing in conflict resolution and negotiation. Her research currently focuses on the impact of new and emerging technologies on international relations and international security, particularly cybersecurity and cyber resilience, as well as the geopolitics of the internet, tech diplomacy, artificial intelligence, and information disorder. It is my pleasure to welcome you, ma'am. Over to you. Participants, please note, if you have any queries, you can post it in the chat box, which will be addressed at the end of the session.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Can you just remind me how many minutes I have or how long I have? Well, baby, I'm going to hopefully share my screen so that everybody will be able to see. If you just give me one moment, because of course it's not playing ball today. Just so it should be there. Let's see if I can. Okay, should be there. Give me one more moment. So I'm going to talk to you today about, and when we're thinking about futuristic trends, let me see if I can, there we go. Can hopefully everybody can see that. I'm going to talk to you today when we think about futuristic trends in an experiment that I undertook actually during COVID on looking at alternative ways to actually teach in relation to international negotiation. And one of the things that, of course, I'm sure that you will experience during COVID when we were all put onto Zoom, and teaching on Zoom had its own challenges, whether we were delivering pre-recorded lectures, which I really hated, I must admit, and sort of how to manage seminars in Zoom rooms. Now, particularly in relation to this course that I'm going to talk about, this is a course in international negotiation that I've been teaching for a number of years. It's a hugely practical course that involves the students doing a simulation every single week, very much based on the Harvard negotiation program, sort of program of problem solving. And of course, when I was teaching it, it became increasingly challenging to, think about matching up. So usually in the real world, I go into the classroom and I would look at it and say, okay, to, find somebody that you've not negotiated with yet, pair up with them and run the negotiation. So there's a constant change. And that was fine, even in a Zoom room on the bilateral negotiations, because I could, have a list and match people up in advance and then put them into the breakout rooms. But what became challenging once we moved into some of the multilateral negotiations or doing more group work or the more type of activities that I wanted to do, it was really clunky to try and use Zoom. So I had an idea to create to play around with creating a virtual platform, or creating a virtual sort of reality space. Now, this was just before Meta or Facebook became Meta, so before it was really launched. But to look about, could I use create a parallel to the classroom that would give a little bit of more freedom of movement to the students themselves in the participation of the course. So I created this platform. Our office is based at 29 Tavistock Square. I've called it 29 Tavistock Square, and created a parallel to our actual department. I'm using a virtual reality platform called Verbella. It was a platform that didn't require any additional equipment other than a computer, so the interface could be accessed through the computer. And with that, the plan was to try and run a series of activities leading up to actually doing both a bilateral negotiation and a multi sort of lateral negotiation in that space, as well as for my own experience, to see how it felt to teach in that environment and what did it add. I was also really interested in looking at, can this be used in any way as an environment for teaching, particularly to help students that have sometimes challenges in interacting in the real world. Either they're a little bit shy, they find it a bit embarrassing, how to build their skill, and also to see if students or people negotiate differently when they negotiate as an avatar, particularly when they don't have those non-verbal cues. So there were a number of reasons. And also at that time, I don't know whether you remember, lots and lots of the big companies that were doing their hiring at that point were doing their sort of open days for their graduate programs on similar platforms, in these kind of virtual reality platforms. And I also thought from a skills basis for these students, it was important to have an alternate way to practice being in this environment before you were doing it as part of a roadshow or a job show. So those were sort of the key sort of places that I was looking for. So understanding the student experience as a whole, thinking about how do we optimize pedagogical activities for virtual platforms and hybrid teaching, how useful would it be? And what and from the substantive part for furthering knowledge in the field of teaching, and in particular teaching negotiation, what did it tell us about risk-taking behavior? So to do this, I ran a series of events, including, so in this particular course, I always do a movie evening at least once in the term. So we started off with using the movie evening, doing onboarding. I presented a lecture, so one of my weekly lectures, instead of doing it on Zoom, I did it in this forum. We had a bilateral negotiation simulation. I practiced also doing my office hours, my general student inquiry meeting. We did a case study workshop, and I also ran, because I'm also the in our department the director for careers, and I was had to run my careers week online that year. That the network, I used it for the networking event, and where we had a careers week scavenger hunt. So it was a whole series of events trying to understand, what does this add to education? In order to test what I felt about it, I ran 3 surveys. So one that was prior to the sort of concentrated week, where we had activities in the virtual reality platforms, so thinking about what are the questions, and as well as baseline questions about individual negotiation style and strategy. I repeated it immediately after the week, to think about how they viewed their experience, and particularly about the platform itself. And then I repeated many of the questions the following week, after the students had returned to Zoom, to do another simulation in Zoom, to try and see whether they felt there'd been any tangible change on their actual negotiating style. In this course as well, part of the assignment for the students is they write a weekly journal on their experience at negotiating that week. That includes assessing what their strategy is and then how it plays out. So I also had all the accounts from their journals as to what their experience was that week in the negotiating platform. So just to get a little bit of a flavor of what the analysis that came out of this was, and there were lots of games along the way. I worked with the technical people on the side to set up the platform. It was quite easy to do. This particular company, Verbella, they have kind of models, and they help you do it, and it's really quite fine-grained to what I wanted to put on the walls, and how you want to make different the layout of your particular space. And there's spaces within it that you can have rooms, and once you're in a room, that's a closed room, you can't hear what's going on outside. Even when there's lots of space in the wider spaces, there's zones that people could step into with like circle rings, so people can have private conversations that aren't heard by the rest of the group. So it's an interesting experience, just going through thinking of like your interior design to make it look in the way that you want to. So as a whole, and bearing in mind, students at this point, I ran it in the second term, so they'd already done a term on Zoom. And as a whole, students, they're sort of a little bit ambivalent towards it, but as a whole, they felt that they learned and absorbed less. Now, a lot of the reason to this is there's little quirks to working in this platform because you have to like do things that you don't think about doing. We walk into a room and sit down as an automatic process. With this process, you have to walk in and sit yourself down, and sometimes you hit a button wrong and you stand up, which was occasionally frustrating, but that means that minds are split into different places. What did they feel they liked being that feeling in a real classroom? Of course, after 6 months or so of everybody being online, actually probably 9 months by the time this course started, people actually, interestingly enough, felt less lonely on the platform. The dislikes were not being able to see real faces, and I'd say the distraction of the technology. This was a real problem for students that were neurodivergent, so which is an interesting addition to this question. When asked the students about social engagement, and we looked at a couple of instances when I did the onboarding, and we did sort of a class get together and to see how the social engagement worked. Generally, people found it quite awkward. The absence of faces was extremely difficult, so not being able to read micro emotions, which is one of the things we were particularly testing in that week's negotiation. There was a tangible difference if they felt they knew the person in real life, but they did enjoy freedom of movement, and 60% of the class said they would return for social activities in that kind of reaction. What I think worked well, so, and this is something we did in the Careers Week, having had, because we did this part of the experiment first, was looking at when we did the scavenger hunt, what you could do is place sticky notes all over. So when you walked into this room, and you could walk in and there were sticky notes that said, go and find somebody in a red shirt and say hello. So you could prompt the social interaction in that respect. In this platform as well, it was quite nice. They also had like a room, they had public spaces you could go to. They had public spaces that was a beach, but they also had public space that was a nightclub with a DJ, and there's actually your avatar can do dance moves. So there was a lot of fun with the students exploring that, as I say, particularly in a time and space where you couldn't really go out and do these things. What was the overall feeling of the bilateral negotiation simulation? So this was a bilateral negotiation simulation in the week, as I say, where I was particularly teaching about the importance of nonverbal cues. So there's no, way to realize how important those are than actually taking them away from people. And we had a series of rooms where people, where the students themselves went in and participated in that. They'd already done 4 Zoom bilateral negotiations previously, so they had a good sense of what it was to do a bilateral negotiation. They had their materials distributed in advance, and they were paired with a brand new negotiating partner, because in this course I always rotate negotiating partners. As a whole, 75% enjoyed it, and 35% of people actually felt it more confident. But they felt 55% actually felt it was harder to achieve their goals, which was interesting. 40% felt they were more competing. Now, this is against a baseline. Right at the beginning of the course, we do a baseline to think about what type of negotiator personality are you? Are you a competing negotiator or cooperative negotiator? But 40% felt it did affect them. 45% said it didn't affect their negotiating style at all. On various aspects related to the role play, as a whole, say they generally didn't feel it created any difference in getting into character or initiating the negotiation slightly. Some people felt a tiny bit easier to get into character, a little bit harder to initiate the negotiation. What does become obviously the element that we were testing for was 90% found it much, much harder to understand emotions and feelings out of the whole group. 50% found it harder to express emotions and feelings, which was, again, it's difficult to, because they only had voice to be able to do that through as a whole. And what it did materially affect is trust in the counterpart, which obviously is a significant aspect of other negotiations, but it felt significantly affected how they trusted their counterpart. When looking at it, when returning to Zoom, 87% felt the experience had changed their negotiating style. This was one thing that I was really interested in. If you could take people that are having, can it be used as a type of, if you want, negotiating coaching or therapy tool, and thinking about how can it students or people overcome certain obstacles in their negotiating style. And would this be a suitable method to do this that's a little bit less embarrassing than sitting with people one-to-one? 62% felt more competitive, but of course it did hone down people back into the attentiveness to nonverbal and visual cues after they returned to Zoom. And they also felt, because of that, they were better at understanding their counterparts' feelings, so paying greater attention to that non-verbal element of their counterpart. So when we look at it and sort of looking at what was the successful elements for both students, freedom of movement was, they really enjoyed. It allowed them to consult notes in a way that can be less embarrassing when you're directly face-to-face in a room. Particularly from the aspect of breakout rooms. And when we did the big multilateral negotiation, where in the multilateral negotiation, there were 13 different groups of students, and it was over 3.5 hours. And it involved students being able to caucus with each other as they represented different countries, as a having to do that into breakout rooms. And, with the, I don't know if you remember when you'd put those 1-minute warnings and tell people they were exiting a breakout room, and which can be very jarring because you suddenly moved out mid-conversation. So it gave students a lot more agency over their negotiation. 80% generally said they were willing to participate again, and they enjoyed the experience. Now, again, that an element of that can be the novelty aspect of it, because we were all pretty burnt out on being on Zoom at that point. What were the challenges? From my perspective, and from what we saw some of the students have, there were challenges accessing the platform. It did, like we found with Zoom, it could suddenly decide to update, it could kick you out. It was a newer platform, it was a slightly bit buggy, so it didn't always work very smoothly. Sound became a problem. Obviously, the connecting microphones and systems in became quite clunky at times. Walking and movement, and this is why I took this talk, learning to walk again, because you really do have to practice almost literally just walking, because you find yourself beginning to, as you're trying to control yourself walking in this thing, which is just by using like your left, right, up, down arrows on your computer, but you find yourself like walking into walls, walking into furniture. And it's interesting because, these are some of the questions we ask ourselves in these environments. It really doesn't matter if you walk into a chair in a virtual world, it's not going to do anything, but somehow you do still feel that you've done something wrong, or you've walked into walls. So it definitely takes time for practicing. And I think what was important with some of the other sessions we had in advance of doing the actual work, but nonetheless, it was still sometimes difficult. What did we learn from it? Well, if you're using it for social activity, and you can't just dump people in the virtual space and necessarily expect that they're just going to get on with networking and conversation in the same way as we would in the real world. So it's useful to create stimuli or conversation points for social activity. As I say, when I used it for the career networking, had all these post-it notes all over the space, and it was sort of find somebody who works in tech, find somebody, you know, talk to somebody who's wearing the same color top of yourself. It was trying to create, but it needs that kind of guidance. Definitely felt it was more valuable in the sense where it was relevant to the learning you were trying to do. So particularly from the non-verbal cues, and sort of if it's part of actually the learning journey, I think it's really useful. The platform at the time was going to be updated to try and integrate a new Zoom functionality, and that would also give the opportunity to be able to see your own face. So say you presented in a meeting to the avatars, would they be able to see your own face in it? Definitely practice walking is what you see about it. What about me? How did I feel? So I actually gave a full 50-minute lecture in it, like I would give my weekly lecture alongside slides. I also acted as a host to a number of events, including the movie evening. On a personal level, I did not love it. I found it really difficult as a presenter. I like to present in a very dynamic way. I like to walk around. I use my hands a lot. I found it very, very hard in this mechanism to think that if I want to talk and walk around the virtual room at the same time, I had multiple things to think about. Now, that could possibly be resolved on a platform where you're using more equipment, a headset and a glove, and that would be tracking your movement and do that for you. So that would be resolved. But I personally didn't feel it was reflective. I think you become really interested. One of the things that I found extremely interesting was watching, there's a whole strand of research called the protest effect, where they look at the extent that people try and do people as avatars, try and represent themselves more closely, or do they take the opportunity to take on, whether it's having green hair or, a different body or body shape or anything else. And I actually found, but what they actually found is people try and represent themselves quite faithfully to what they feel they are. And I found the same thing. So when you go into the avatar room to do your avatar, there's different clothes, there's different shoes, there's different hairstyles. And it was a little thing, but the frustrating thing that I felt that the hair didn't match my own hair. So as a medium for me personally teaching, I didn't love the experience of doing it that way. And I know that the students, when we discussed it, they felt that the lecture was less valuable delivered by me just pretty much via voice, which is an effect, rather than having the classroom experience, even as it was at that point. I gave it as a Zoom lecture. So the other thing I want to just touch on super quickly is on another course that I teach. I also teach a course called From Cyber Warfare to Robots, a Future Conflict in the Digital Age. This is a course that really examines the impact of disruptive tech on the international order. It covers everything from cyber through to AI, space, genetic engineering in the future, the military. Is really wide-ranging, quite future forward-looking course. And one of the things that I've introduced in that course has been running since about 2016, was instead of one of their assessments, or instead of having a full 3,000 word essay assessment, they're assessed on two things. One is a policy brief, exactly as a type that they would need to write in the workplace for policymakers. And the other aspect is they do a video blog. Now, the video blogs are the challenge for me with these blogs was that there were, in the class, I'm dealing with so many new technologies, so many new ideas. If I spend the lecture just explaining what each of these are, I would never get to do the substantive teaching about, how this is challenging our notions of realism or whatever it is we're dealing with that week. So I found there was not enough time. There's a big emphasis now in the UK to think about what are the transferable skills that students can develop in the classroom, and also about giving students presentation experience. And it's difficult to, if you want to put, I don't know about in your university, certainly at UCL, there's a lot of challenge with doing presentation assessments because they have to be either recorded or marked on the spot. You usually need a second person there to make sure that the marking is calibrated. And if for any reason there's students are absent or they miss their slot, it becomes a challenge within the actual assessment process. So that was part of the challenge that I was facing. So what I did was create a video blog dictionary, in effect. So I asked, part of the assignment, students create a 5-minute video blog on a key concept relating to the course alongside a 1,000-word transcript. And what I do is I look at that usually starts a 10-week course. I usually start these at around week 3. So I've given enough time for the students to understand what the requirements are of it. Every week, there's, depending on the size of the course, there's a number of topics that we will be talking about in that week in the substantive part of the lecture that I set down as subjects for the video blogs. That can be anything from autonomy in AI to quantum to cyber norms, whatever it might be. And the students create a video blog, they submit it in that week, and it's uploaded and then shared to our learning platform. We use Moodle, so there's a section on that Moodle page, and it's part of the other students, if you want, reading that week to make sure that they've checked out the video blogs before they come to the lecture. Only requirements is that it's really to be as an original as possible, explain the concept in a way that they would enjoy learning the information themselves. So it's a real challenge to think about how to present complex issues in an understandable way, which hopefully is a valuable skill also for the workplace. There's huge advantage to this. The assessments aren't all back-ended at the end of term when they're writing against multiple deadlines. They are doing this progressively through the term. They learn key presentation and editing skills. They have to meet deadlines. They have to learn package it up. So similar to professional environment, they learn to manage that. It often informs their final assignment because they've done the research for this. They usually choose a similar topic for their final assignment, so they're distributing out their research, which I found really has improves the quality of their final assignments. Peer learning is increased. They really want to watch each other's vlogs, whereas, sometimes you get low engagement with readings. They really do want to watch what their peers have done. We run a vote at the end for which is their favorite video. Well, obviously an anonymous vote, there's a prize at the end for the famous video. From my perspective, infinitely more fun to mark because I watch the videos. They have to submit the transcript because of, again, the way that we do marking is it's all done through Turnitin, and they can't submit the video itself. So I use the transcript as a way to comment on it, but I'm actually watching the video alongside the transcript. This year, I'm actually going to experiment. So the course just kicked off again for this year with creating an Instagram channel for those students who want to share it as well to help increase their, like they might a publication, increase their public profile so they have something to also put on their CV for their employability. I don't know how much time I have. If you want, I'm happy to show you some examples of it, but more to talk through them. We've had some, super original blogs. One in the year actually that we suddenly got put onto, so 2020, when COVID interceded in the middle of the team. I had a student do a brilliant video where he wrote a song about smart contracts and recorded it. We've had people co-op their family, their friends into their videos, and even their dogs have become part of it. There was a student last year who's a saxophonist, used his saxophone and playing to use the concept of malware, and showed what this would do if it's for his saxophone playing, as well as we had the usual ones of interviews or people using technologies like the sort of whiteboard writing to able to convey their point. One, funnily enough, the guy that did last year did a video about VR, actually sort of tried to do a make it yourself VR headset, and sort of showed how he was using his bike helmet and his telephone and a pair of glasses. He got some really good originality, and it's a lot of fun in opening up the classroom, providing different models of assessment, but also models of assessment that have a tangible impact on their transferable skills. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today. I'm happy to answer any questions about either set of formatting, but I think the point for myself, and for teaching to be super enjoyable for the students themselves, to be able to absorb it, but to really push forward the methods, and thinking about, particularly in that conversation that was going on around 2020, 2021, that everything was going to be in the metaverse. We've not seen that quite yet to play out, but to think about where does it have its uses in both online teaching, and even when we're impacting in face-to-face teaching, can it be used as a tool? So that is my presentation, but as I say, happy to answer any questions. No questions?
Dr. Melanie. Now we are open for questions. Any questions from the audience? We have one question from the participants who are attending online. What impact might virtual reality and augmented reality have on the learning experience in the coming years?
I think it's, and not being a prophet, and everybody, we all seem to be wrong in everything we think sometimes when it comes to technologies. From my experience, I think it can be really useful as a tool, as I say, in specific, with a specific goal, rather than, so I know there's been some attempts at using them for like MOOCs, for mass open online courses. I think that will depend. I still think there's a huge amount in being able to see someone's face and micro emotions. So unless either the avatar technology gets good enough that it can simulate those micro emotions, facial emotions, so that you feel you're getting from the teaching experience that kind of dynamism. But I think when it's being used perhaps for things like teaching therapy, perhaps in things like clinical psychology, or as I was saying, within the negotiation context, when you have people who are shyer, when they want to perhaps try out something, but they're not confident in trying it out face to face or in a person, they want to try out being angry in a negotiation, or they want to try out different tactics, like, then I think with that kind of space, I think it can have enormous value. I think, do we see ourselves all going and teaching as avatars in the future? I really hope not. I really hope that people still want to be taught by ourselves and our but given how some of the platforms are developed, and I'd say as they can interact with Zoom a little bit more, possibly, but I think we're still going to see ourselves teaching in the classroom for a long time to come. I hope.
Thank you, ma'am. We will take one more question. What is your view on the loss of interpersonal skills that occurs with asynchronous learning?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
What is your view on the loss of interpersonal skills that occurs with asynchronous learning?
Yeah, I think it was difficult to test that, particularly with the work that I've done, because, COVID and working with online environments and I did a lot of work, and I don't know, with the classes I worked with to do also more social elements. So we did quizzes, we did ways of getting to know people. I think the biggest obstacle when we're looking at sort of technology and interpersonal skills that I've witnessed since, if I'm tracking it from teaching since 2011, and even in thinking with the policy analysts that I'm hiring and things where people are very much engaged in online environments, and I do think that the ability to communicate, if you want, professionally and respectfully, is being contracted. I think everybody's beginning to, now this may be completely different in India because for cultural perspectives, but certainly in the UK, I find that people are beginning to speak and write as they do on text, or, or whether it's on social media. And I do begin to feel that that's impacting how they relate to people interpersonally, in wider spaces. There's also a set of assumptions that they come to any conversation with that I do feel is affecting some interpersonal skills. One of the things that some of the studies we've done at UCL that look at employability and, this tension between, does everybody need to be a data scientist, or what's the future of what do we need to be, skills are we having students in, is still that the requirement, not so much for there's still going to be data science requirements, but more the ability to communicate that information really well. And I do feel that there is a contracted amount of students who are able to do that well because they're in so many online environments, and those students that can be taught to do it or do it naturally will be the ones that excel. And it's like an irony. I was talking to a taxi driver. I was in America, he's Brazilian, and we were talking about football, and he was like, yeah, there's no more good Brazilian footballers because all the kids are playing football on the computer. They're not going outside to play football anymore. And I think that's a little bit the same with interpersonal skills. We do need to redress that balance in the classroom. And just to point out, my seminars, when I teach seminars, my face-to-face seminars as a whole are tech-free seminars. I don't allow computers. So they have computers in the lectures, but they don't have computers in their seminars, exactly for this, to make sure that people are still learning to speak to each other.
Thank you, Dr. Melanie. Thank you for this session. It was very informative. It has definitely enlightened our minds, and I'm sure that it's going to encourage us in our future events too. Thank you, ma'am. Now we will begin our second session. Now we'll begin our second session with Father Professor George Taratil. Father Professor George Taratil, FDP, has a doctorate from the School of Religion and Philosophy, University of Madras, making a study on Sri Narayana Guru movement in Kerala. He was a junior fellow, Indian Council of Philosophical Research during the period 1998 and 2000. He was the head of the Department of Philosophy at Salesian College, Sonada, and later became the principal. He has co-edited the work Communities and Identity Consciousness, South Indian Trajectories at Madras University publication based on his research on community transition in the last century. His translation of the life of Brahmarshi Narayana Guru and Divya Apkar, Daivakinde Vikritikal by M. Mukundan from Malayalam to Nepali have been completed for Sankhya Academy, New Delhi. He has over 30 research articles and book chapters to his credit. He has been engaged in teaching, research, and educational administration. In 2019, he was awarded the Silver Plaque by the International Association of Facilitators for Leadership in Education. He is presently an independent researcher at Princeton University Library, New Jersey, and University of San Francisco, working on the book project Christian Education and Democracy in India. Professor George Thurtle is presently on sabbatical in Auckland, New Zealand, after a stint as an independent researcher doing archival work at US universities. He has been in higher education in Darjeeling for 3 decades. More recently, Father delivered a special lecture at the Center for Buddhist Studies in the University of Hong Kong on 6 December 2023. In May 2008, the Nepali Sahitya Sammelan Darjeeling conferred a citation and memento for the contribution made through the institution in promoting Nepali language and literature of Darjeeling. These are only few awards which I have mentioned. There are many more awards and nominations to his credit for his excellent contribution towards higher education. We are extremely delighted to have you amidst us, Father. And on behalf of Jyotirvas College Autonomous, we extend a warm welcome to you. Father is joining us virtually from New Zealand. May I now request you to proceed with this session. Before that, participants, please note you can post your question in the chat box, which will be addressed at the end of this session. Over to you, Father. Father, can you please unmute?
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. 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 Is it okay now?
Yes, Father.
Okay. So I was saying, first of all, congratulations to the organizing college, and thank you for the invitation. And I just wanted to check if I could share my end of the slide. I think, Mikhail, if you are there, let me just try once if you let me permit. So I go to share. Oops. Try. And format. Desktop. Allow share window. And different share content. Okay. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes, sir, we're able to see that.
Now I need to go to view and slide only. Is that okay?
Yes,
Slide
sir,
only.
you make it full screen. Otherwise, yes.
Is it is not at full screen?
Father, press the play button.
Enter full screen. Okay. Now, okay. Are we there?
Yes, Father, you can continue.
Okay. So, first of all, in this session, let me clarify what we are going to do. In a session on the futuristic trends in education, to me, coming from where I do, meaning from the social science, philosophy, history of education background, we who are in education, in whatever role that we are in, from classroom teaching to the administrative desk or field operations or meeting up with the challenges of the day, ought to be asking one significant question. And that is, are we clear about where we have come from before we decide on where we intend to proceed to? So, looking at trends in the education sector, my concern is not directly with the challenges that we are, in a way, very well aware of our context, of our situation, and the global trends along the line, the previous lectures, and especially the one that just concluded, took us to. The location of this reflection from my side is with regard to how we can learn from the trajectory of education that has brought us to where we are, and understanding it, whether it gives us some insights into the possible direction for our personal and collective, institutional and departmental uh, processing of what we ought to be doing or what we can further do from wherever we are positioned. So, the perspective or the position from which I am looking at uh, this theme of what is the future of education is coming from how did we land here at all? And that question of the, the mega picture, the long-term view, the historical sense alone, in a way, can give us the dynamics that is operating now, the ways in which we can possibly critique it, and possibly find new directions. So how did we reach where we are? If we were to look at a brief history of education from where it began. Today, we are familiar with modern education, and we are all part of it. But when we think of this modern education, we are thinking of the developments in the history of education ever since the university system came into view. The globalized modern education vastly across the world, the imitation or the replication of the European model of education. And in a way, its dominance, the outcome of the entire colonial history of expansion of this modernity, is being questioned. There are resistances, for example, and we see this in the emergence of Asian modernities. So we know, if we are located in India, and that's my primary clientele or the audience that I'm expecting, I'm speaking to. And when we say India, now in today's context, India is everywhere. The Indian diaspora is across the world. Here I am speaking to you from New Zealand, in one of the, let's say, the second largest in the Northern Island. Even here, the Indian students have overtaken the Chinese students in the last couple of years. In the US, the Indian student population has overtaken all other Asian communities. So the presence of the Indian diaspora, sheerly from demographic point of view, gives a presence and alterity in the mode of perception, of speech, of learning styles, of living practices in all these places. And think of the same thing of the other largest Asian population, of the Chinese, across the world. So you get an insight into what we are talking about. On the one side, we are part of a system that has a historic origin, providing the kind of education that we are doing and its own onward trajectories. And on the other hand, alternatives or to this dominance of a Western mode of education and how it can emerge, and the competitions around it, whether it is in educational technology or in the economic processing. Now, when we say this Asian, we also ought not to forget that right from the 9th to 12th centuries, there has been the presence of the Ottoman Empire and the Islamic alternative from Cordoba in Spain, which was the city of the world in the year 1001, to the Mughals not too later in India. So this spread too was a global alternative to the narrative of the modern educational system and still persists. Now, we are witnessing that in the Indian context, this desire, aspiration, and a long held projection and processing of an alternative taking place. And the best example for those of you from Indian background listening to me is the new education policy. So, on the one side, you find the aspiration that the Indian university system should become replications or even better the best of the Ivy League universities, be it in the US or the best of the universities in UK or in China or in South Korea. And therefore, this competition, this is the struggle in a way, or the demand placed on everyone in the system to be the best. And this is a global phenomenon. This little small Waikato University, I was just looking through, they were in the international rating, way below one position beyond below 1,000. But in the last couple of years, it has come up within the 500 list. Everyone is making this effort. Now, when we say that there is this, on the one side, the new education policy also gives you the other aspiration that this alternative is not only to create an alternative system competing with the Western or the modern or the European or the Christian, but something that is indigenous in the sense of Indic origin. Of course, the contestation therein too, who exactly represents the Indian. So if we are looking at the future of education, so within this kind of contested terrain of developing an educational framework that matches or that represents the worldviews that are operational, where do we stand? Where do we position our orientation? How do we integrate the dynamics of diversity in the very mode of seeing the world itself? So, this is the bigger picture, or the inner picture, or the closer dynamics of the operationalization of education, be it as the principal of the college or the president of the university, or just the head of the department or a young faculty who has come into the educational system. Everyone, in a way, is being posed with this challenge. Let's look at the Indian story of, the contestations of the cultural ethos that is the end game of the educational process. So, do we carry along, or do we, as institutions and promoters of institutional processes, make specific choices in the campus, within the department, as an institution, of catering to the actual situation of the city, the village, the district that or within which the institution is located. So there is this contestation that I am referring to between uh, the kind of knowledge that was valued as the high knowledge and the knowledge that was considered to be the practical application of it. Now, where does this come from? Actually, if we look at, as Abraham Irali in his book, The First Spring of Indian History, writes about, the first millennium from 500 BC uh, to 500 CE, the era of, the expansionism of Buddhism within India. And the post-Buddhist millennium, as it were, from 500 CE. Now, this contestation between the Buddhist worldview and the Hindu worldview, he says, is the real history of Indian educational contestation. Now, this gives rise to what is being valued as knowledge. So, where does the insistence on the rote memory, which we in a way decry today, coming from? Sometimes we tend to think that it is, the outcome of the 200 years or so of the colonial education, and quoting Macaulay's minutes as if it's the direct intervention of creating clerks out of the educational system that gave rise to the kind of rote learning as the, you know, the forte of Indian education. It has its advantages. So you get, the literary contests and the word memorizing contests across the world by Indian students. But its origin goes back to this kind of a knowledge system, which was, the high knowledge that was the traditional knowledge. And we know that the very fact of knowing or going to school was not something that was considered, as we presuppose today, as meant for all. So everyone did something in terms of skill training. And this too, you will find in the new education policy, an attempt to bring back the 64 colors back into, the knowledge system. So this gives you the contestation that I am talking about, whether it is in the 2020 new education policy or it is the contestation that goes back to the times when the, uh, let's say, the Buddhist monks and the Sangha are having literal contestation with the Brahminic elite who were the other contestants or whose dominance was challenged at the arrival of Buddhism. So this part of the historic emergence of the educational process as it has happened in our country is something that we cannot afford to neglect or not take a deeper look. I am presenting it in a very nutshell manner. Now, this also gives um, us the uh, the problematic of what today is considered as extraction education. This is, I'm quoting from, those of you who read Seminar, uh, August issue of 2022. Entire issue was dedicated by Malvika Gupta and Felix Padel, editing it. And no, so um, an education that is sponsored by the mega industry, the corporates, in order to invade into the tribal space. So one could look at it in the way of, you know, they are the weaker population, and therefore they can be overridden, a kind of political view, which definitely is one angle. And if someone is there located in the central tribal belt, I refer to Ranchi or the Bhil tribe or the Sandal tribe, or the entire Chotanagpur region. And if we go back to how the states were formed in 1956, all the major languages got their states. But what about a state for the tribal population? 6% of, so Northeast managed to have its geographically kind of seclusion and therefore its identity, but not without problem. But in central India, yeah, so, and the whether it is for coal, whether it is for iron ore, whether it is, so all these mines were located, and even today the Neamgiri, in Orissa, these for extraction of the highly prized, minerals for making the shiny tops of the phones that we use. So it is going on, and so education is being provided, but an education to dislocate not only physically, but also in terms of not allowing the alterity of that indigeneity of the people to persist because they are being invaded into. So this as the extraction education. Again, I'm summarizing it, but for those interested, you have the story. So it's like as if we are on this planet and we are in education sector and the new education policy, and we have come a long way from as educationists being the soul of the nation, or being the thinking leaven and preserving the the essence of the culture, to mercenaries of the millionaires and billionaires. So, we are on this rat race of what is the placement in our department, in our institution, and with which industry, if we have tie up, will our prospects be brighter. We are into it already across the world. So there some people are displaceable. So, and this, when we look at its ramifications, it's mind boggling. So the hard data tells us from the latest Oxfam report that has come out, and that's a slide with which I will end again, is that in the last couple of years, the top 5 billionaires have doubled their income, and 5 billion people have had their income reduced. So this contestation and the future of education. So, this is what brings us to the second part of my presentation. So, we have looked at the history, and the history begins. I mean, if you are located in China, or if you were, let's say, if we were part of the Machu Picchu and the Incas of Latin America, uh, or the Aztecs of Mexico, or the Indian uh, heritage that we have. So this kind of uh, choice between an education that is egalitarian and that which promotes everyone to have a say, to have a view, to have a place in the sun, versus a direction which eliminates some for the kind of stories that are told, by which they are not equal. They are not meant to have the privilege that is ours. So, this creation of the we, us, and them, and this we have seen it in Rwanda, they are cockroaches, so they can be eliminated. So, this uh, is the challenge, and it has a very long history, and we are in the throes of being subsumed into today's contestations of being agents of the structure that wants to restrict privileges for some. So the story is not over, and the chessboard game is on, or the war is not ended. We are losing battle after battle, or we are succeeding to create spaces of resistance. This is the choice that determines how we will utilize the AI that is coming in, the chat GPT that is coming in, the hybrid mode of teaching that is already at our desktop, and the hard look, or the very personal look, that we take as we enter into a classroom, into the eyes and faces and the dresses of our students, and each one's personal history. And that brings us to, in my way of looking, the future of Indian education having to be determined by, sorry for that typing error, Ambedkar and Sri Narayana Guru. I remember sitting in the office of the head of the Department of History in Stanford University not long ago, and Aishwari Kumar, he is a scholar on Ambedkar, telling me that no Indian student ever has written an essay as an undergraduate to overtake or to say is superior to what Ambedkar did in Columbia University with his publication on caste and its origins. And I've been reading Isabella Wilkerson, another prize-winning author on the and her book, Cast the Lies That Divide Us. You can, if you get time, read more. And so he was very pointed in saying at the end of the uh, Constituent Assembly's work that yes, we have a written constitution, and the entire democratic process, which began in England, and which has an unwritten constitution, and it goes back to the 12th and 16th century, and for 400 years it took for England to really to come to uh, build a system where everyone did have a say in a decision that if it affected everyone. And to that extent, we should be proud, at least a country that has an Indian as its prime minister. I mean, the process or the people, even in this session you have had just now, the speaker before me from there. So, or in the, the challenge of keeping the country democratic is our task, the educationist task, and that is the future of Indian education. So Ambedkar, who said, educate, agitate, organize, dare to engage with his mind. And this is what Aishwarya and we were talking, you know. With Gandhi, we have stopped. Nehru is now down the drain. People are, but Ambedkar, how many scholars have dared to challenge his writing, his thinking? That is the future of education if we want to preserve the legacy of a Buddha who challenged an existing system, created a system that reached to South Korea and Japan, and edicts up to Greece and Kandahar on its way, and China and Tibet. But from a place where there were 1,000 monks in Sarnath, and you've been there, at least I've been there. But a time came where there were 1,000 monks. There were not even 4 to look after that place. And monks would come from Sri Lanka or from Myanmar to maintain the place, where, of course, today there's now new life again. So this up and down of the contestations of dominance and its disappearance do not happen just like that. There are agents and agencies. There are thinking minds and operationalization of processes that either build or vitiate, either make noble citizens daring to face the opponent, as Gandhi said, and not eliminate. So that's one. And the other, into this new vision, is Narayana Guru, who said, one caste, one religion, one God in a humane world. I did my research 20 years ago in Madras University. After 20 years from Wisconsin University, I got the invitation to take part in the Metaphysics and Politics series of conferences that took place in Le Méridien in Cochin as part of its Biennale celebrations. And right now I'm working on my book related to that, having completed, and it will be released tomorrow, the one on Christian education and the making of democracy in India. Having completed the 20 years of my work in higher education in the hills of Darjeeling, having completed my studies in South India on democracy in Darjeeling. Observation of one who came from outside, learned the language, lived there, and it's not the beautiful snow mountains, nor the tea, nor the railway, which is a world heritage, that makes Darjeeling unique, but it's people. People of different ethnic groups who came in as an opportunity for employment, with the same story of migration, whether it is into New Zealand or into Australia or into US today. And having learned one language, created an identity of the Indian Nepali and fought or persisted in demanding from the state to include Nepali, which is the original language of another country, as an official language of the 8th schedule of Indian Constitution. So that's the democratic process. So my projection is that if we need to save India, if education has to have a future, and a future that is doing research and showing the way to the administrator, to the industry, and to the state, the official representative of the nation, as Hannah Arendt would say, how we should go, where we should go, what should be our goal. Yes, we need to go back to the past. We have a heritage, yes, but is it only of Ram Temple? Is it only of Babri Masjid? Or it is also of a Buddha whose thinking trust, walked through those mountains of Darjeeling across to Tibet to China? And that's what I was talking about in Hong Kong University. To the research scholars, that we think that people do not preserve. Yes, in the hearts of people, that thinking that all are equal, not the hierarchy and the privileging of few taught by Buddha survives. And that's what Ambedkar said, and that's what Srinarayana Guru is bringing us back to. And that probably is where, and of course, you can choose between Jyotirao Phule or E.V. Ramasamy Naikar, Pandita Ramabai, Gail Ombert, God rest her soul, an American having come and Maharashtra, learned Marathi, lived, married a Maharashtrian, and passed away. And we had a condolence meeting for her last year. So, on my last slide, I'm coming back here. The peril of a corporate agenda is this, and the choice is ours. What's the future that we want to have for education in our classrooms, in our colleges, in our universities, and as in and through or our NEP and our education departments, wherever we can have a say. Thank you.
You're now open for questions. Participants, if you have any questions. We have a few questions from the online participants. How can colleges and universities adapt to foster a culture of lifelong learning in an era of rapid technological advancements?
Yes, a college or university can do so many things to promote lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is what you instill, first of all, to your students, saying that your education doesn't end because you have graduated or you have completed your PhD, that you have a responsibility of learning yourself as well as teaching others at all stages of life. And this definitely is something that all should be indoctrinated with. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. One more question we have. What is your view on the politically motivated addictions and relations in textbooks and university curriculum that is happening in India in the current scenario?
My opinion on that is that we within the educational system are not agile enough to make our voices known. If for every such act in any state or in the center, if everyone were to send an email, that's the minimum, or to start in change.org or in awas.org, this kind of an activism of academic activism alone can give direction in these times. We sometimes everyone is busy, so we think and we note, but we expect someone else to solve the problem. And I guess being proactive, as for example, Anhad, Sabnam Hasmi's, what has started, Mere Ghar Aao Dekho, kind of. So these kind of waves, or what Aditya Mukherjee and Mrudula Mukherjee are doing in New Delhi, and the former professors of JNU, making concerted effort to point out as that we need the sense of history in order to have a holistic education. And if that anything that is preventing it ought to be resisted. So all I can say is that it has to be a collective effort and an ongoing effort, and never being defeatist. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Father, for that wonderful session and addressing the queries of our participants. I extend a warm gratitude to Father Professor George Tarpel, SDV, and Dr. Melanie Garson for their insightful sessions. Both the sessions were informative, engaging, and thought-provoking. It is a great opportunity for us to hear your thoughts and expertise, which will enable us to shape our understanding of the transformative future of education. Thanks to our dear principal, Dr. Sister Mary Louisa Sathapathy, for your presence throughout the session. I also thank Dr. Latavi, our controller of examinations. Thank you to all the participants who have joined us online and offline. Thank you for your participation. Please fill up the feedback form, the link for which has been posted in the chat box. Please note, 2 feedback forms will be posted. I request all the participants to fill up both the forms. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.
Yeah, thank you from my side once again too, especially as I noted to Sister Principal and the IQAC coordinators, especially Josephine. Thank you.